There we go. It's 5:30. Okay, so hi everyone. Lovely to see you. Thank you for joining us for our webinar today. So you've joined us at Radiflow, and we have Sid from ARC and Lee from IBM, and we're going to be talking about OT Roundtable, current OT security challenges and how they can be addressed. My name is Karen Allison. I'm marketing executive at Radiflow, and we're pleased to have you with us. We have from ARC Advisory Group, we have Sid Snitkin. Sid is VP Cybersecurity Advisory Services. He leads ARC's industrial cybersecurity practice in providing the research and consulting support that industrial companies need to protect their critical IT, OT, and IoT systems. As I said, from IBM, we have Lee Harris. Lee is a specialist in threat detection and remediation, and has been concentrating on MSSPs for the past 3 years. He currently leads the sales strategy in EMEA for GSIs and MSSPs and of OT security. And from Radiflow, we have Rani Kahat, Radiflow CISO. Rani brings with over 25 years of experience that spans in various disciplines, including risk management, GRC, and cybersecurity defense, advising and supporting various industries, including critical information infrastructures. Or in Rani's words, he's a mechanical engineer that went bad and joined cyber. So I'm sure you guys are going to enjoy yourself tonight. We had a practice session yesterday, and everyone was just chatting away and enjoying themselves and speaking about the issues they loved most. And we're going to start with Sid, who's going to show us a bit of a presentation about how he sees the OT security infrastructure nowadays. So Sid, please share your presentation and start off our webinar.
Okay, thank you, Karen. Let me just, can everybody see that now?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, that's fine.
Just one more thing before you start. Sorry, I just want to remind everyone, please, if you have any questions, just enter them in the chat and we'll present them to the panelists afterwards, after we move forward from the presentation. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, whichever. It's morning for me, but afternoon for a lot of other people, I suspect. At ARC, we've been following the industrial cybersecurity market for probably 10 years or so. And we do a lot of market studies and write a lot of reports for our clients and things like that. So what I wanted to do to kick off this webinar was to really just kind of give you an update on where we see industrial cybersecurity today. And let me first start by, there we go, by defining what I mean by industrial cybersecurity. Let me do one thing here, if you don't mind. There we go. And for us, industrial cybersecurity, it used to be, people might use terms like OT and ICS cybersecurity, and that's where we started our practice, was down in the area down in the bottom here, which is protecting control systems. But today it's really integrated. It's starting to integrate very much with the IT cybersecurity. As you know, industrial companies have very large, significant IT systems. So we kind of cover both of these two areas. And let me just start by talking about where we see the status of cybersecurity in these two areas. And here, to do that, I want to use this model that we developed at ARC. We've used over many years, and we've modified it over time and things like that. And the purpose of this model, we call it the ARC Industrial Cybersecurity Maturity Model. And it's not a typical maturity model where you have one bucket, you know, you're 1 to 5 or something. It's more one, the point of maturity here was we have an issue that we see a lot of companies, they'll invest in the technologies, but they kind of ignore the people issues and they ignore the cybersecurity management solutions issues. But if you look at this model, just to give you a quick understanding of this model, the bottom are the processes and above, you know, which we have recently changed to just be the NIST cybersecurity framework processes. So there's identify, then protect, then detect, and respond and recover. And as you do those things, you're increasing your level of protection. And the ones that I show in blue are kind of the basic kind of protections. I mean, we call them passive defenses. These are the ones where you put in a technology like a firewall, you put in some rules, and you let it do its job. And then the orange ones are more talking about active defense. And active defense in this case, we're not talking about responding to attackers. I mean, trying to counterattack, but We are talking about things where you detect kind of compromises that get by these basic passive defenses and get into your system. And in that case, the issue is more you're trying to detect them quickly, stop them if you can, or isolate them or do something like that. And this area is more focused on managing the impact, the potential impact of things. So it's detection and response is a common term today, where the left side is more trying to manage the likelihood that somebody might get in. And a key thing in this model is you see at the bottom are the processes, and then I have these enabling technologies above there, and endpoint protection, network security, anomaly and breach detection. And above that, one thing we find a lot of people don't do is they don't have good cybersecurity management solutions. They will just buy the technology and think that they're done, which is a major mistake. And then above that, I show the people. And as you go across this way, you're building the level of protection because you're going up this staircase. What we find is that the kind of people you need to manage that are more like IT and OT specialists. You may have been able to do that to just manage endpoint protection or something. But as you go across and you start to use more sophisticated technologies, you need more sophisticated people. So you get to the point where you specifically need cybersecurity professionals. Now, using that model, if you think about where we are today, the IT systems, I think, in industrial companies, like in many companies, are way up at the top. They pretty much have people. They have a lot of cybersecurity experts in their own company, or they may have SOCs, where they may have SOCs, or they may have a third party do the SOC work for them. But they generally have people. They have good processes in place and a lot of tools to help them manage the security. And then they also have done probably everything they can do to protect the assets. Now, if you contrast that with the OT world, the OT world is really more like these pictures I show here, these three arrows. And I say most companies, I mean, most big companies certainly have put in defenses. They have endpoint protection, they have network security, they've segmented their networks and stuff like that. So they're about at this point, most have not done anything about anomaly and breach detection, though that's becoming a growing topic, particularly because of asset inventory capabilities. So I'd say the OT solutions are around here, the technologies. Many don't have the people. This is a major problem in OT cybersecurity, is that they don't have the people to manage this technology. So what happens is, and they also don't have the tools. And one thing we talk about with maturity, when we say maturity, it's the alignment. It's when these three things have to be aligned. And actually, your security level, your real level of protection, or what you really have, is probably the one that is the least. In this case, whether it's actually right there or not, I don't know. But this is kind of what we see. So most companies, even though they say this is where I want to be, well, actually, where they want to be is here. Most standards say, I think, like the IEC 62443 and things, were developed a lot around endpoint protection, network security, network segmentation is a very big thing, and processes to do those things. They're starting to expand into the right side, but they're pretty much here. And you'll see that many OT systems aren't even up to where they should be relative to the standards. And the reason for that is because they don't have the people and the supporting technology to be able to keep these defenses in good working order. And if you look at that and you compare it now with OT or with IT, this is the gap that you have to add this additional gap in. So it's a very big gap between where OT systems are and where IT systems are. Now, in the old world, or when these things were developed, the standards and things like that, I think saying I have a defensive system that's just the blue could have been adequate. As I said, it meets the needs of many standards, older standards or initial standards at least. But the world is certainly changing. So today, I think people need more than that. Now, let me make my point about that. There's two aspects that I think have changed the situation. The first has to do with the threats that are coming in, and they're certainly more challenging today. And I'm not just talking about ransomware, but also the targeted attacks have become much more sophisticated. So this is a chart I use a lot, and what it is just, a chart showing the likelihood. These are the kinds of attacks: general internet malware attacks, sophisticated attacks, targeted attacks. And if you think about those, on the left in the solid line here is really the likelihood that a company would see that kind of an attack. And certainly you see a lot more general malware than you do sophisticated ransomware than you do targeted attacks. So likelihood goes down as you go across these more sophisticated attacks. But the impact goes up as you go across those things. So in the world, the way it was yesterday, I call it yesterday, was that companies said, okay, I'm going to worry about mostly around this area because the risk is really the likelihood times the impact. So if you look at it, this is what they were targeting, was this line in the middle, and many of them, and the passive defenses brought down the likelihood quite a bit, as well as the impact was not so terribly bad usually. But now what's happening is tomorrow, or today already, I would say, this risk curve, this likelihood curve is really increased. We're seeing a lot more attacks. We're particularly seeing a lot more ransomware. And I think people are much more with the political world the way it is, nationals, countries and things like that, nation state issues. This has risen tremendously. So if you think about that, what you need to do is you need to say, okay, I need to take this line, which is where I was before, worried kind of about these, and move it way over to here. I didn't put in a line, but it would be more around here today. And to do that, what OT companies need is they need more resources. And I'm talking about just OT cybersecurity right now. And that's people and tools to be able to ensure, first of all, that they actually manage these defenses the way I was saying before. They aren't doing that. They also need to add new technologies and new tools and people to be able to deal with the attacks that get by those defenses, which is the more common thing today. So they need to go into active defense technologies, and they also need cybersecurity experts and tools to enable fast response. So that's one aspect, looking from the point of view of threats. Another point of view is this thing with digital transformation. Now, this is a big topic at my company. We do an awful lot around digital transformation. We've written a lot of papers about that. I personally, right now, I think digital transformation, when it started, was just talking about adding some devices into facilities to collect more data. It has broadened completely now to completely new workflows, new ways of doing things, new kind of process, new technology being put in. One area I'm working on a lot right now is connected workers. So now we're really breaking down these boundaries we had around the conventional OT and IT systems, OT systems in particular. So on this picture, I wanted to make the point here. If you think of the IT world, IT, I think everybody on here would know. Much of the IT systems it used to be, and when I have this circle here, this was the conventional IT security. And it was focused on managing things within data centers, servers and PCs. Might have been traditional type of technology or conventional IT technology, but it was kind of constrained. Today, we know everybody's moving apps out to the cloud as well as data. They're starting to integrate in with a lot of additional devices like an access control systems and cameras and things like that. They're shifting the IT systems to remote offices, so you have a lot more edge IT type of activity. And certainly there's a lot of new devices that are being used in the IT world. And if you look at this, so this is what's happening in the IT world. And if you come over here and look on the left, you'll see it's completely analogous to what's happening in the OT world. We're seeing companies move data out to the cloud and apps. We're talking about a lot of IoT devices. There's a lot of edge control systems that are being integrated in with main control systems. And as I mentioned, the connected device, we're seeing lots more use of devices that are personal devices by third parties, their devices connecting to lots of things. So if you look at these pictures, you contrast them, you'll see they're pretty much the same problem. And both the IT and the OT cybersecurity programs needed to expand to cover these issues. The one on the right, I think IT has already done that in most cases. That was really accelerated from connected worker perspective by the COVID pandemic, but they've pretty much addressed these issues. On the left, even though I say this is where OT has to go, a lot of OT is still down here in that main white circle there. So a lot of companies that I deal with, we talk about, okay, I think companies are accepting the fact they have to address these issues. So now the question comes, how do you address it? And a lot of my clients, and I'm a proponent of this myself, is they're saying, wait a minute, we don't have the funds to be able to address all of these OT cybersecurity resource gaps that we have in every single facility. And there probably aren't enough people around who want to work in factories. So convergence gives them a chance to get a cost-effective way to gain the experienced cyber expertise that they want. I mean, converging in some way, working with the IT group. The digital transformation we're finding is also requiring a lot of end-to-end cybersecurity. As I mentioned, it might have been, they used to be isolated issues, protecting systems, control systems, and protecting IT systems. Today, when you start having workflows that cross those boundaries, you need to have end-to-end security for all of that. And, the IT already has a lot of policies in place for centralized policy management, integrated threat information, things like that. So it's a natural to take advantage of that. And the third thing we're seeing a lot is, because of the threats that are happening, CISOs are starting to play a much bigger role in managing of OT cybersecurity. And a lot of them are just starting off by doing what they know what to do. And I think it's the right thing to do. It's cybersecurity is they're saying we want to use the same kind of processes and technologies as much as we can across the two domains. And, and OT people are starting to accept that. They're just saying that IT already has the people and processes to do that. So one last thing. So we see a big trend towards IT/OT cybersecurity convergence. It's been a topic we have annual forums, several kind of events every year, and I manage a lot of panel discussions with end users. And that's been a very frequent topic. And just to close this, I want to mention there's kind of three models we see happening. Now, I use the word convergence. A lot of people hate that term. They say that they think that what I'm saying is that IT is going to take over everything. And most companies say we're not doing that. And so there's kind of three models that there are. And this varies by concerns about isolation. Isolation is a very big thing in the OT world versus the benefits of convergence. And as you go from left to right here, there's more of a convergence or unification that occurs. On the left, we have these people who still say, okay, we'll start working closer together. It's more of a collaborative model. It's not like you're giving any control to one or the other. It's just saying we'll get together and work to make sure that we're addressing things similarly. Then there's more in the middle, and this is the one I see the most common, is an integration of the two kind of programs. And the way I overlap it, if you think of control systems, there's a lot more IT starting to take control of or responsibility for DMZ devices, maybe what's called level 2 and level 3 within the control systems and things like that. And the OT people are starting to gradually accept that. And this involves the big challenge here is integrating the organizations. And then the third, and this is the image of some companies. I know companies who have said, no, we're going to have one common group. And they kind of say we're going to have, maybe within that group, they may have OT specialists, but they have ITs kind of overseeing the whole cybersecurity issues. And in fact, a lot of people, they've stopped talking about IT cybersecurity and OT cybersecurity. They just talk about cybersecurity. And I call that unification. So that's what we see in the market. That's where the trend we see happening. So now with that said, if it's okay with Karen, I'd like to ask the other panelists who have a different view of the market. Let me stop sharing here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to ask them a couple questions to see how what I see and what they see, how it aligns. Okay.
Sure.
So,
I'll just let you know that we do have a few questions from the audience. So after that, get ready for some more questions. There we go.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. So let me just start now. Let me ask Lee, because Lee's with IBM. What are you seeing with your clients, and what kind of approaches are they taking to the IT/OT cybersecurity convergence?
Yeah, thanks, Sid. I mean, we're seeing a lot of interest in this topic. Certainly, traditionally we've dealt with organizations and we've provided IT security, but the transport, utilities, energy market are now coming under attack, and it's very public, those attacks. And so they're now looking at, okay, I need to bring in some of those capabilities that I've had in the IT SOC into the OT arena. And what we tend to see is, first of all, they're looking for visibility across both planes of existence, right? They understand that attacks that can be happening on the IT world may be a diversion for an attack into the OT environment, or vice versa. So the attackers are very clever. Look over here while I go and do something over here. They're also looking at us to help them with velocity in the SOC. How do we apply things that we've put into IT recovery and remediation and apply that to OT to reduce the speed of investigation in the OT environment? And then also that economy of scale. You mentioned the lack of security people available. Is how do I utilize what I have in the IT world to help me in the OT world? And what we're also seeing is our service provider market is being asked to help in this as well. So companies traditionally in IT, in a sort of mid-size sort of type of organization, are starting to move away from doing SOCs themselves and going to service providers. And the manufacturing companies are realizing that they don't really want to be running SOCs either. And they're starting to look at the managed service provider to help them as well.
Okay, well, if it's okay, Karen, I'd like to follow up with a couple questions.
That's fine.
Let me ask this to Ronnie. I mean, I assume you're seeing similar kind of trends when you deal with them. And I'm just wondering, what kind of problems do people asking, are you seeing people have as they try to converge their IT and OT cybersecurity programs? And I'm talking about people, processes, technologies, those kinds of things.
Right, okay. Well, first of all, I really agree with your definition of cybersecurity, and I hate IT/OT. It's cybersecurity, and the methodology is the same for IT and OT. And let's face it, even in the so-called OT, I would prefer using the word production. The technology is basically networking, operating systems, what we call IT. So cybersecurity is cybersecurity. The methodologies of cybersecurity lend themselves to the OT environment. It's true that currently there's a very big gap in knowledge of the automation guys understanding the threat origin of cyber. I would say the biggest gap is not technology. The biggest gap is, I would say, state of mind and language. Engineers or automation guys have been doing for many years what they do and they do best, and they are usually focused on understanding terminologies like hazards, and they're not so much tuned to sabotage and to cyber attacks, where usually they look at components failing, maybe operational failure of a human factor, but they haven't been trained so much on the cyber origin or the cyber vector of somebody doing something on purpose. And we need to somehow have the same SOP, standard operational procedures, that automation guys have got for the last 30 years, and they work and they know what they're doing. We just need to tell those guys, okay, this is what happened on the cyber field, and they will give it the interpretation of what it means on the production side.
Yeah, you made a comment to me previously when we've spoken about you. I liked your point about, engineers tend to say, well, I'll put in a backup for that, as a redundant system. And now cyber people know that, and so they'll attack both systems. So that's not something that's necessarily anticipated. It doesn't increase your reliability. Just the last question for me, I'm just curious is, what IBM and Radiflow are doing to help these customers get over these hurdles. So let me start with Lee.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if you're aware, we started working around a zero trust strategy model with our solution set. We're looking at how do we bring the needs of zero trust into both environments. So, making sure access is protected, making sure that threat detection responds in both levels of the environment. And to be honest, where we are as IBM today, most of our technology is still focusing on the IT environment. What we're looking to do now is we're opening integrations to OT monitoring platforms and solutions like Radiflow present. They've been in that market a lot longer than we have. But we know that with this converged SOC that people are starting to look at, that they need to bring in the OT threat information into the SOC tooling and be able to sort of investigate both IT and OT events in the same platform. And that way they're going to save time and manual activity on running two different platforms. So integration for us is key with the OT monitoring vendors to be able to bring that information into what we're doing in IT, and then build things like playbooks to respond to OT threats alongside the IT threats we've been doing before. And obviously, if we can bring machine learning and AI into the same way we've done IT response, how do we do that within the OT environment?
What about you, Ronnie?
Well, again, there's a few layers. Our value is obviously in the technology and understanding SCADA protocols and ICS environments and the assets and so on and so forth. So that's a technology layer whereby we send information up to the IBM platforms for monitoring. But in addition, as we're over 10 years in OT environments and ICS environments, we try to give our alerts context, production context. And when you're at 3 o'clock in the morning sitting in a SOC and you don't know how to prioritize events, that is a problem. So our mindset is a mindset that follows the OT standards. So things are zoned, things are given impact. The impact can be health, HSE, health, safety, environmental, can be monetary. We try to give the context of prevalence of an attack and the link, or the, how should we say, the inherent threat that if something happened to one system can then migrate to another system. So all that understanding of how a certain production works, and that is the reason that cyber people need to understand a little bit about the difference between discrete production and between other kinds of production processes. You understand the life cycle, you can understand exactly where are the worst case scenarios, and that's the kind of information we bring up to IBM. So it's not just an IP address with an asset and saying this is, I don't know, a Rockwell, blah, 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 but actually giving the context of the cyber threat origin.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Karen, I'll let you.
Okay.
But
so,
other people ask questions.
Yes,
I could do it all day. As you
we have a long list of questions here. So first of all, I don't know if we're going to get to everyone, so I'm sorry about that in advance because I can see the questions are just rolling in. So we'll try to cover. No, seriously, there's lots of questions coming in here. So
yeah, I see the Q&A myself.
Okay, so yeah. Okay, so let's start with this. So IT hasn't figured out, this is Art asking, IT hasn't figured out 24/7, 366 days a year, I would say, the specialty protocols used in OT. Operator consoles need to come up ready to go and logged in versus waiting for a user to log in. How do we deal with that? Even the most basic parts don't match. OT availability, IT deny access. So, Sid, would you like to start with that, and then Ronnie? And
well, you know, I come from the automation world. I don't know if any of you know that. I mean, I was an engineer, worked in automation for many, many years before I became an analyst, and I had that same view. You know, oh, well, the IT world is easy, and it's very common comment among my friends that they'll say, oh, well, IT has it easy. You know, they just go in and they update because that's they do it with them. It's like as an analyst, someone will come and all of a sudden my PC was updated. But there's an awful lot in IT that is not that way. You know, if you go to a stock market or you go to a financial institution or you go to any company that's running a business 24 hours a day, a global business, their systems are just as critical, I think, as saying that I have to keep a facility up and running. And the other thing I would say is, one thing that I think a lot of people I deal with at least realize is people used to kind of say, well, it doesn't matter. I mean, everybody knew that IT was probably seeing more attacks, but it wasn't so bad if they had a problem. Even something like ransomware. Okay, you got the information stolen. That's bad for the company. Everybody sees that. But when you look at something, the Colonial Pipeline was a perfect example. where nobody got into the OT systems, had nothing to do with OT, and the company had to shut down the operations for, I forget, it was like 4 days. I mean, it was an absolute disaster here in the United States, absolute disaster. They just did it out of caution to do that kind of stuff. So it's not like the availability of IT is much less than OT. Now, I mean, again, I'm an engineer, and you can have a system there with I come from the steel industry, and if you have a blast furnace, you don't want to lose control of your blast furnace. I mean, that could explode and kill people and all this kind, and that's very true. And maybe that is a difference between IT and OT, are the dangers. You know, we talk about safety is a very key issue, but to be honest, a lot of companies I deal with, even though they're very safety conscious, a big issue still continue operations, which is the same, I think, as in the IT world. So I that's certain, there's that's a point there. The other point I would just make, I don't want to keep talking here, but the other point I would make is I do find when I deal with IT people, again, I come from the OT world, but the IT people are more sensitive maybe to those issues, and I can't speak for individuals, but I find a lot of IT people understand that the OT is important. Now, in a lot of companies, I'm finding more and more people dealing with OT cybersecurity who actually come from the IT group. And maybe it's taken them a little time to go through factories to get sensitized to some of the issues, but they're very open-minded and stuff like that. So I don't see that as a big difference, to be honest.
Yeah, if I could jump in, Karen.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question, because, coming from the field, we get it a lot. And again, I'm coming back to the wording or to the taxonomy. We are cyber people, we're cyber experts, and IT and OT is I really hate to use that. In an OT environment, okay, you might have a situation where a terminal has to be open, no passwords, nothing. You can't. Fine. And you can't put in a network access control. You can't from the field. Okay, fine. And you can't put a firewall between, I don't know, layer 1 and layer 2, because the latency of the firewall, this is a high pulsing system. The HMI is pulsing really quickly. And you can't put a firewall. Fine. That's why we are cyber people, and we will say, okay, those are the limitations. Now we can start doing compensation controls. We can't do preventive controls, we'll do compensation controls. We'll transfer the risk. We will find the right way in order to better your risk posture. And that is the first thing we do with our MSPs. When we don't come with our tools of IT, I'm going like that in the video, of IT, and say, you got to use this, you got to use, I don't know, two-factor authentication. You understand the business, you understand the limitations, and you mitigate the risk with different means if need to be. And monitoring is one of the first aspects when you can't do preventive. So at least if you can't do online preventive actions, you catch it in time and you have the right SOP or playbook, or what you may, for that kind of scenario, and how to mitigate it, remediate as quickly as possible.
Unless Lee wants to say, I was going to add one more comment. I don't want to. If Lee wants to make a comment, but
no, I'm good.
Oh no, one other just last comment I wanted to make on that was, this was what I said was Sid Snitkin's opinion, but of course that's based upon talking to lots of people. But whoever asked this question, Art, I think you said the name of.
Art, and he say thank you for your answers also.
Oh, okay. Well, you're welcome, Art. But the one thing I would recommend, I'm not doing a sales thing here, but at our ARC forums, we have a lot of discussions. And I had a panel discussion a couple of years ago, again, about IT-OT convergence. Again, this was really good. And on that panel, I specifically had 3 CISOs, came from IT, and I had 3 people who were responsible for the OT cybersecurity. And many of them came from engineering departments and operating departments. And I had somebody there, for example, from Georgia Pacific. I had someone there from Air Products. Every one of them was saying they have learned that, the IT isn't as bad as they thought it was. They've learned to work together. It's just meeting and getting over this hurdle, this cultural hurdle but once they do, then they've worked very well together. So they said that's where they're going, and they're using them because they don't have the resources. They know they can't have the resources. They can't get the resources, so they're looking for help. And the same, I think, is true when they go outside the company, for third-party MSSPs. Again, they make sure that everybody understands those issues and stuff like that. So
yeah. Okay. Here's a question from Rick. Rick is saying, we are an IT MSSP. Why should we look at OT offerings today? Lee, I think maybe you'd want to answer that one.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, as IBM offers managed services, we also have managed service providers using our software. And certainly the feedback I'm getting from service providers today is that they are seeing that, one, they want to address new markets like transport, utilities, energy, which I haven't typically gone into. So they're seeing that requirement coming from that customer base. But also, there are MSSPs and GSIs today that are already offering those solutions. And I think if you aren't able to differentiate yourself, you're going to get left behind, because these market sectors don't have all the cybersecurity resources. They are going to be looking at service providers to, even if it's not run a 24/7 SOC, it's going to be, I want an assisted SOC. I want my team to run 9 to 5, but I need help on the other hours because we know the attackers don't sleep. So certainly the demand on us and our services partners is growing, and I think this is a really good market for MSSPs to get into. It'll deliver more revenue, and it'll differentiate you from the standard IT MSSPs that exist today.
Yeah, Sid?
Again, I'm sorry, I like to talk. I'm an analyst. But no, I was just going to say, I talk to a lot of companies. And the big thing that's happening in the industrial space is, and a lot of it's funny. I mean, it's driven a lot by like ransomware and things like that. But CEOs are getting tired of hearing about cybersecurity, to be frank. And they're going to their CISOs and saying, it's your job to take care of everything. And now the CISOs get involved, and they don't understand OT, but whoever they're working with, whether it's their own SOC or whether it's an external SOC, they're saying, you have to take care of that. Now, what I would say, though, is most CISOs I talk to, they're not interested in getting down into the nuts and bolts of taking care of everything within the facility. Their biggest concern, number one concern, is visibility. They want to know what risks they have because they're responsible for them. And then they want to know that it's being taken care of. So there's that level, and they want to make sure that, and when anybody needs help to resolve a problem, they want to make sure the help is there to do it. So it's that kind of relationship. And so when they go to their MSSPs, they're saying, I expect you to cover this too. And almost every MSSP I talk with, is asked, well, the reason they're talking to me is because they're saying, my clients are asking me to do this. What should I do? So I think it's an important thing. And I would agree with what Lee said. I think that's a very important thing for anybody who's interested in the manufacturing or infrastructure or heavy industry kind of sectors. You should be thinking about how are you going to support OT, and maybe it's through a relationship with. I don't know what you have to do. Every company is different, but you should be thinking about that.
Okay. We have two questions from Stanley Nathan. I hope I said your name properly. He's asking, how exactly does the recovery model work, and what are its objectives in OT cybersecurity? And he also is asking, from a definition standpoint, is it correct to state that cybersecurity equals InfoSec security plus OT security? So if you guys want to connect those or just start with one.
Okay,
Ronnie, you want to take that?
Yeah, that sounds like a Ronnie question.
I'll start, yeah. But I'll try to avoid, if I may, and excuse me, the definitions, because we can get into the InfoSec. What does InfoSec define, and what is the scope of InfoSec? And is InfoSec the same as SecOps? And let's leave just talk. Really. Okay, as I see it currently, we're in a transition period in the OT market. Currently, I'm going to say something that's kind of on my mind. Like we have this this area whereby you have cyber people that don't really understand how to do incident response and remediation mitigation inside the OT. And then you have automation guys that don't understand attack vector of cyber. If you look now, even on the safety standards, they're not just now starting to talk about cyber attack vector, because it usually was electricity, hydraulics, floods, earthquakes, natural. These were the kind of attack vectors that we're looking at, or threat vectors. And only now they're starting to look at cyber as a threat vector. So we have these two groups. One understands the threat, but doesn't understand how to remediate, and one understands how to remediate, but doesn't understand the threat. So why don't we divide the work? Because it is a transition period. So let's divide the work and let's have, the Raki model of responsibility, accountability, and so on. Let's define a scenario. The threat group, cyber guys will say this can happen. The guys from the OT will say this will be the impact. Now we'll say you're responsible for this and you're accountable for that. The cyber guys will be accountable for the detection, for trying to bring the context of the meaning of this attack. Is it a worm? Can it propagate? Can we now, do we have a clean backup? The chain of supply, for example. How can we check chain of supply for cyber attacks? Okay, so we'll bring that input prior to the incident and also detecting the incident. Once an incident happens, the responsibility moves to the automation guys. Hopefully, we've done our homework and we've got a standard SOP on what has to be done in this kind of scenario. Am I detaching this controller from the network, but not from the actuator? Am I detaching now the controller from the network and the actuator? Can I now reuse this machine, or does it have to go to cleanup? And so on and so forth. So we are there to establish the playbooks of the scenarios, explain the meaning that they can have these cyber attacks. The automation guys will do the remediation, and we will come back in as cyber people to make sure that mitigation and persistency and stuff that they're not really aware of has been done correctly. So that's a kind of a flow, and that's a kind of a flow we do with IBM and with the MSPs, of understanding exactly who does what, because definitely we're not going to block somebody's access or to block an HMI from doing a certain command. We'll alert you that that is happening, and obviously the automation head will decide how to deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a good point, Manny. I don't want, if there's IBM partners on this call, we're not just talking about, integration of Radiflow and QRadar on the threat detection, but Radiflow is doing a lot of integration into our SOAR platform as well for that response, exactly those response processes that Rani was talking about.
The one comment I would make, because I don't know the person who's asking the question, but, in the OT world, a big thing, one thing a lot of people are recognizing is recovery. One thing is that they say I have a disaster like the Colonial Pipeline again. But most plants, number one, they have to make sure they have a recovery problem. And it doesn't matter if somehow their operations have shut down and they need to recover from that. If you have that kind of a disaster, one thing is to say, I just have a compromised machine and how do I deal with that? But a key thing that many people are finding is they don't even have backups. Now, in the OT world, changes are not managed, I don't think, as well as in the IT world. The IT world, I think very often you get a new version of that software. Like I just got a new version of Microsoft Word, which is actually irritating me. But in the OT world, someone will just go in and change something, or they'll bypass something for some immediate problem and stuff like that. And one of the big issues is they have problems with backup. So one issue is making sure that they have those kind of processes in the OT world. It has nothing to do with cybersecurity per se. It's just if the device fails, they often struggle to recover. So recovery involves a lot with backups there. And it's a different environment because you have to actively make sure you monitor what has changed, because it could be changed from lots of places and things like that. And it's not necessarily in a master copy. That's the problem. They don't necessarily update master copies.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I know we're getting close to the end of our time, but I think we have a time for just a few more questions here. So Ruri is asking, I hope I said his name correctly, Should OT networks continue to be segregated from IT networks as a best practice on reducing the risks on fragile OT devices? Or should OT networks be treated as data diodes and only allow a few data to come out to IT systems? Some data come out to IT systems.
Do you want me to address that?
Sure.
I mean, it's very much, it depends completely on the facility you're talking about and the situation you have. I had one of our forums, I had another panel discussion where I had some people from BASF, and I asked a question similar to that. I mean, I not that question, but similar. But anyhow, the point just said, we have such a variety of facilities. Like if you go into chemical companies, there's so many different kinds of situations that you can't come up with some general rule. There are some that have no reason in the world to ever even want to share data with somebody. There's no reason to share the data. Maybe you need a command. I mean, but I know companies that will just still carry, they'll carry USB sticks around just to share that because it's not a key issue. And if that's your situation, yeah, isolation's a smart thing to do. I think anybody in security would say if you don't let anybody get any access, okay, it's probably pretty secure. Now, that's setting aside the fact that people do come in and out with USB sticks and PCs and things like that. And then some people say, well, we need a little bit of data. So, okay, we'll use, and we only need data from it. So maybe a data diode works. But what I'm seeing is more and more and more people are saying, well, I just want data coming out, except I need these other things too. And all of a sudden you become two-way communications. And this idea of trying to just maintain isolation is really falling apart. That's kind of one of the things, like I mentioned, I was working on connected workers, and that's completely undermining it now, because you have people on the outside that need to get in, and you want to let them get in. If you have a facility and you have a problem, and your main person who knows that equipment is at home, you don't want to say, and he says, I'm not coming in, or he can't get in. You say, call him up, say, let him get in. So you're constantly letting that, and that's becoming a very common thing, remote service people. You also have people inside facilities who might be working on something that says, oh, I need to get this information from this vendor's site, or share or collaborate with somebody on the outside. And so you're constantly doing that. So I think those boundaries are falling apart. And one argument I make, and I don't know if it's totally true, but I believe it is. Again, you have IT. IT is dealing with these kind of issues and has been for years, of how do I make something that I'm interacting with people secure? So you have to kind of say, one way is to say, I have this, I'm going to not allow it. The other way is I'm going to allow it, but I'm going to make sure I do it the right way. And I think people are starting to adopt that approach more. Even in safety systems, I don't want to get off on a tangent because I know time's running out, but there's some companies, Emerson happens to be one, where the issue had to do with safety systems, which is a critical thing in many, many industries. It's a whole separate system. And the strategy for many is you do not connect the safety system to anything else. It's pure isolation. Other people said, yeah, but if I do that, I can't get information to it. I can't maintain it. There's a lot of issues. So they're saying, no, you have to integrate the two, but then make sure you put in place all of the protections that are needed to make sure that you manage that security. So one is kind of ignoring the security using isolation. The other one is saying, no, I'll actively manage it. And I think the trend is more towards towards managing. Mm-hmm. But then the question is, what do I have to do? And how do I do it in the most secure way? But, you have to do that. But I think there's a lot of cases in IT where they have that same situation. There's a lot of high confidentiality information. I mean, in defense industries and governments and all kinds of things saying, I'm not going to let you get in my investment companies like Fidelity. I happen to have accounts at Fidelity. I trust that they aren't going to let anybody damage my accounts, right? You have to. And they take that seriously. And they, as far as I know, they've never been compromised. So I think it's not a black and white question anymore. Mm-hmm. And the trend is more towards managing the connection.
Yeah. Okay.
I'd like to add just we used to call it a Wirecutter protocol, where you just clip the RX and the TX on each side. Technology is moving too quickly. We can't do that. The concept of segregation is a core in cybersecurity. At the end of the day, business owners will want to see connectivity, and it's our job to make sure that it's secure. So basically, what I'm trying to say is that, just look around. I mean, look at electricity, for example, the 61850, for example, okay? That's a service-oriented network. For one grid to take over from another grid in case of failure, he has to send packets, data, and to tell him how much, when, where. Is that IT? Is that OT? Okay, so, and this is the connectivity that you'll see more and more and more. A train that's crossing Europe from one train provider to the other.
Mm-hmm.
So our job is to make sure that the business vision or the business strategy is supported by us in order to make it as secure as possible. But the terminologies of separation and silos, we're not going there.
Oh, and I think maybe Lee would add, but something like zero trust. I mean, that is something, again, I'm working with connected workers, so I'm kind of sensitive to that stuff today. But, it's one thing to say, I'm just going to let somebody call into my system and I'm going to give them a VPN connection into my control system.
Yeah.
That's what many people have done. And, and they've violated their own rules about isolation. But if you're going to do that and you expect to do that, then why don't you make sure you put in all the controls to truly enable zero trust, which I think is an accepted kind of strategy. It's the best that people know today. Nobody's going to say you can't ever compromise that.
Mm-hmm.
I think people can probably compromise isolated systems eventually if they try hard enough. If they'll find a way to get in.
Yeah.
Yeah. Privileged access and that sort of thing's got to be part of that plan.
Okay.
Which thing is, I just wrote something about that, so I agree with you completely.
We have a question from Jacob, and he's saying, from a control perspective, what are the low-hanging fruits that should be converged first?
That's a Sid question.
Yeah, and I'm just trying to say, I mean, to me, again, when you talk about convergence, you have to talk about the people, the processes, and the technologies. You can't just talk about the technologies. Most people are starting off with trying to converge the organizations in different ways. And there's lots of different, like I said, some people just see it as, okay, let's at least get these people to talk, start that kind of stuff, get familiar with each other, build trust and stuff like that. So that's the first place I think most people start. The second place is, I think, it's more instrumenting, maybe is the right word, for things to be able to get visibility between IT and OT, where you're really not doing anything from the outside. You're just adding things to get visibility to tell you that something is happening. And when I say that, to get asset inventories, to get alerts, to monitor network traffics and stuff like that. But from the technology point of view, the one place I see things happening a lot the most, I'm seeing more and more a trend towards the networking becoming kind of the core platform of security, because so much is connectivity today. I see a lot of stuff like when we talk about zero trust, for example, a lot of that is centered around network technologies and enabling, like in control systems, they often don't support something like NAC. Well, you need to have some way you have to do that. Maybe you don't go and take out your equipment that you have, but you do something to encapsulate it so that you still have the NAC capability to get into that type of stuff. So I think networking is one of the initial ways. That, and then the other aspect I'd say are these cybersecurity management tools, as I mentioned before. A lot of companies just don't have the tools. They don't have the people, and then they also don't have the tools to make their people efficient to begin with. So they suffer two ways.
Mm-hmm. Does anybody else want to respond to that question? Or Sid did a good job.
Oh,
yeah.
I like to talk, so.
Okay.
That's the first criteria to be an analyst. You gotta like to talk.
It's also the first criteria for participating in a webinar, I'd say, a roundtable webinar. Okay, so I think we'll finish off with just one last question. So Hillary here, and it's always fun to get women as well asking questions. Hillary is asking, are most of your customers implementing OT cyber due to regulatory compliance or for mitigation of business risk? Maybe Sid, you want to start that off?
Oh, okay. I mean, it depends on the industry, but a lot of companies, they're very concerned about cybersecurity. But many, certainly regulated industries, the primary thing is to do it for regulatory purposes. The power industry, electric power industry is a classic case of that. And we're starting to see new regulations appear in things like transportation and stuff like that to drive that. And sadly to say, I think most companies, that's turned out to be one of the major drivers to get people to do stuff are the regulations. You hope that's not the case, but that does seem to be the case. The sad thing about it, though, is when you talk to those industries, you also find that what they do is they just do what the regulations say. They're only focused on reporting and compliance. It's more almost compliance than regulations, to be honest. But then that's one kind. But then you have the other companies, and then it might be like the oil and gas industry or the power or the chemical industries. They have industry groups that develop not regulations but guidelines, and everybody in those ones, I would say, it's more driven by safety issues. And again, the big one I think is business continuity. They don't want to go down like a Colonial Pipeline and stuff like that. I hate to keep mentioning that poor company.
Yeah, I'd just like to, I think as Sid said, it's a matter of who the client is. But the last couple of years, because of the increase of attacks, a lot of the companies are not under any regulation, and following a standard is voluntary. So yes, definitely if you're a nuclear core or if you're electricity or transportation and you have hazards and safety issues, then, yeah, of course you're regulated by the government and so on. And those are traditionally the clients that Radiflow has, for the last over 10 years. But in the last couple of years, food manufacturers, food packaging, industrial manufacturers of plastics, mining, silicone chip manufacturers, everyone's getting hit. And the initiating vector here, okay, the engine is risk management and is purely financial and is purely business. And really, and that's where I think, is the main offer of an MSP, that you can show that it's easier to buy than build your cybersecurity posture, and to minimize the threat and to reach a certain maturity level, and to go back to the board and say, okay, I've mitigated this risk and I mitigated that. So again, it's really a matter of what industry or which industry you are. But currently, we can see a massive shift of the private industry that's not regulated becoming clients.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with both Rani and Sid. Even in the IT world, logging was a compliance tick in a box 6-7 years ago, and the threats that have now had a financial impact have changed that to I need to detect threats. I know I'm under attack. It's not about the compliance now; it's the protection of business, and I think that's what's flowing down into the industrial environments. And also the other thing that's impacting this is the insurance companies are no longer just paying out for these type of attacks. They're saying you need to have these standards in place. We need to understand that you're monitoring this and you're doing your utmost to protect yourself before we'll pay you back in any insurance claims. So there's a lot of other factors now that affected the IT world 5-6 years ago that are now coming into the industrial world as well.
Just one last comment from me is we had some people from Moody's at one of our events a couple of years ago. Moody's, and their business is not necessarily insurance. Their business is to rate companies, and they are interested in cybersecurity. They're starting to consider cybersecurity in the ratings, which is going to affect the stock price, their bond prices, and stuff like that. So it's definitely a lot, and CEOs are aware of that, and CFOs are particularly aware of that.
Yeah. Okay, well, I think we've reached the time, our sort of time cap for this webinar. Thank you so much for Sid, Lee, and Ronnie for all of your questions. We're even getting some feedback from our panelists saying that it was a great webinar. So thank you everyone for joining us today. It was a pleasure having so many of you join us. We don't take that for granted, really appreciate it. And that's it. Thank you so much. We'll see you in our future webinars later on. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.